Loops and branches in Octave are the topic of this video. A loop refers to doing some section of code over and over, and a branch refers to doing one section of code versus another depending on some logical condition. Conditional branch, also an if branch. So whenever we have code that we want to only execute if certain conditions are met, we can use the if statement. And it looks like if, and then the condition, and here we have the body. So the body of code that's executed if that condition is met. And then we close it out with an n, or an end if. An example, say we call the built-in function input and ask the user to say how many pizzas do they want. And then input waits for a numerical enter, or input. That value is assigned to the variable pizza count. And now we'll use an if branch on the variable pizza count. So if pizza count is greater than 10, then we will execute this code. So we will print this message to the user. So here's our logical condition. Pretty standard. We also have else. So if we want some action to execute if the condition is true and another action if the condition is false, we can use if else. So we have code for the true condition and code for the false condition. Extending the previous example, if pizza count is not greater than 10, then we'll print out this message. And then if we have multiple scenarios, multiple conditions that we want to test for, we can use the else if. So if this condition and otherwise check for this condition, and if none of the conditions is true, then we'll do this else. So this would be the default code to execute. So here we're asking the user to enter a number, and say if the number is 1, then we print this. If the number is 2, print that. And else, print cheese, because if they enter any number other than 1 or 2, they're going to get a cheese pizza. We don't have to have this default case, the else case, for else if branch. Now if we have some code that we want to repeat as long as a given condition is true, we use a while loop. So we just write that as while, and then the logical condition that has to be met, and then the body of code. And in Octave you can say end while or just end. It'll execute the same. So here's an example of getting a user to stop the program from asking for input. So we assign a 1 to this variable n, and then as long as n is equal to 1, we're going to prompt the user for a number. And if they enter a 1, the number they enter is assigned to the variable n, and then after executing the body of code, execution will go back up and check this condition. So if they enter a 0, or actually anything other than 1, execution will drop down to after the while loop. And the final topic is a for loop. So a for loop differs from a while loop in that we want to execute the code a certain number of times. And up till now, that is if, else if, and while loops, things have looked similar to C, but the for loop has a different constructor than in C. So in Octave or MATLAB it looks different than it does in C. So here we have the generic outline. We have for, and then we create a counter variable, and then we have some expression that assigns a value to it, and then the body of code again to execute every time we go through the loop. Now this assignment operator works a little differently than if we were just assigning a value to a variable. So generally this expression is a vector, and instead of assigning that vector to the variable, the for loop will assign one element at a time, or one column at a time, one column at a time of that matrix to the vector, or to the variable here. So if this expression is a range, a row vector, or a scalar, then the value of the variable, the counter variable var, is going to be a scalar each time the loop body is executed. If we have here for expression a column vector, a matrix, var will be a column vector each time the loop body is executed. So examples. For j equals 3, and then we're going to use the colon operator, and we saw that in previous examples to declare a matrix. So if we just had this part here, at the prompt, if we said j is equal to 3 colon -1 colon 1, then j would be assigned, j would be a vector, a row vector, and its elements would be 3, 2, 1. So it would be a 1 by 3 vector. The first element would be 3, every element after that would be 1 less, and the final element would be 1. So that's how the assignment operator would work just for declaring a variable. But here in the for loop it works differently. So here we have this variable j, and the first time the for loop executes, j is going to be equal to 3, and then the next time the loop executes, j is going to be equal to the next element of that vector, so it'll be 2. And then the next time it'll be equal to the subsequent element of that vector, so 1. Anyway, here's this example, and here's what happens when you execute it. If you type this in, say in a script, and then call that script, then this for loop is going to print out the number and a new line. So it'll print out this integer j. So it'll print out 3 and then go to a new line, then execute the body again. And now j is 2, and now j is 1. And then after j is equal to the last element of the array, then we'll exit the for loop and execute this line, and then we'll print out liftoff. And that concludes this information on branches and loops in Octave.